Thanks so much to each of you for joining in our microdosing group discussion tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about the difference between thought and thinking. And it seems like those would be pretty comparable to each other, but when we look at what the difference is between the definitions of those, it helps us actually give consideration to how we respond to them a little bit differently. So when we show up in the world, when a perfect little tiny human pops out onto this planet, they are in what we call a natural state. In this natural state, there's a very limited awareness of the idea of self. This little human is just showing up. They're not thinking about them in relationship to others or them even in relationship to themselves. They are just showing up in that existence moment. They don't have words or language that has been established yet. So again, no definitions, not a communication. They don't know light from dark, cold from warm, a spanking that might be happening versus all the stuff that goes on in the birthing room. They're literally just in the moment of existence. They don't have an understanding of right or wrong. Right and wrong have definitions connected to them. And again, in this natural state, we remove all those definitions and we're more in the state of being and the state of existing than the state of defining anything. So if you're on the planet for longer than about 30 seconds to a year, though, you start to understand thought because that's how humans communicate. It's also how animals communicate, but I'm talking about humans tonight. We move into thought. So thought is awareness. Thought is an awareness of self, an awareness of self in relationship to others. How do we have some of those transactions that we're able to get our needs met by other people? It's a recognition of physiological responses. So thought is connected to our understanding of hunger and temperature and pain. That's where we start to have more of just this awareness. Again, doesn't have to have a lot of definitions, but it is a awareness of the existence of self and the existence of others within nature. And then we move to thinking. And that's our big conundrum complicating factor is thinking itself. Because thinking is what takes a thought and gives meaning to it. I feel something. What does that mean to me or about me? And then we have a definition connected to that. Oh, now we have this right and wrong and good and bad, helpful and harmful. We have a psychological discomfort that happens connected to thinking. Babies aren't born with psychological discomfort. They might have some physiological discomfort that's new to them in that experience initially. But thinking is what creates psychological discomfort because, again, it's an interpretation of the thoughts, of the recognition of responses. So now we're in what I like to call a modified state. So we started in this natural, pure state, for lack of a better connection word. We became more aware of ourself and others and nature and things that happen around us and to us, and that thought started to play a role in our lives. And then we give meaning and definition to those various things that happen, and that is where thinking becomes that complicating factor. So now having thinking go on and on and on is its own coping mechanism and is its own challenge. So my question kind of to pose to the group tonight and starting up our discussion is recognizing those various stages that we have gone through to get to where we are now. In what ways do you see that your thinking contributes to angst or discomfort in your life? Rhea has an answer.
Oh, am I unmuted?
And you are unmuted, yes.
Oh, thanks, Charity.
The laughing was out loud. You
Oh,
must
was
have hit
it?
the unmute
Oh,
button.
thanks. I'm glad I didn't start cussing.
Yeah.
It's funny. I just had something happen this afternoon that was very um, upsetting. It was not pleasant. It was ugly, very personal. And I called my friend and said, thank God I'm microdosing because I feel absolutely nothing. And I handled it beautifully. And I'm so happy for myself that there was no reaction, no response. My logic and my words to me were just on point, and I walked away and I just said, that is not my problem. But what was important for me and what I relayed to my girlfriend was I didn't have this rush of emotion. I sat and I was just so able to be so focused. Um, so I know that's not what you asked, but I mean, most of the time, and what I do for a living, my brain is over analyzing a side look, extra deep breath. I am paying so much attention to people's behaviors, and it affects my personal life, right? At the grocery store or in something personal or intimate. My thoughts and my thinking do so much for my day to day. And it's just been beautiful that that's changing and I can just be.
Yeah. And to recognize it so quickly in that moment is also a reflection and moving back towards that more natural state. Because
Hmm.
that modified way of thinking is really the complicating part because we're okay, I feel this, why do I feel it? What does it mean about me?
Hmm. Hmm.
Instead of this happened,
Hmm.
maybe I feel something, maybe I don't. Again, with microdosing, we've reduced that blood flow to the amygdala. So for you, you didn't have that heightened emotional response, which is extra exciting because it's
Yeah.
easier to not have it or to be able to have some pause in that than to have to go backwards and try and sort through it. So
And that was exactly what it was, is my body was in such a fabulous state of facts and information. And I wasn't cold or robotic.
right.
I said, hey, this is not true. And that was unkind. And I'm not going to allow that. And um, it was beautiful on my side of things. And I mean, wow, and I was able to communicate the facts of the situation. So, without being so personal, how wonderful to be able to work towards a resolution. The other side might not, and the other side is going to have to figure that out. But I, you know, f- got off the call and went and I've had a wonderful afternoon. I mean, it didn't affect me at all. I, in fact, kind of ran through a lot of positive things, like, gosh, none of those statements were true. I'm actually a really nice person and I'm actually doing really well in life and someone just views me differently. And
Mhm.
I mean, who does that? But maybe you all do. I don't. I usually get upset. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
my brain didn't feel flooded. I mean, I literally did not feel that physical reaction, right? First, which we know is our trigger.
right. Absolutely. And yeah, the beautiful part of that, to your point, is that you were able to recognize the thoughts there and not let the thinking and the interpretation of it take over. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Hmm.
Rick has his hand raised. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I would second what she's saying. For me, the way you describe thinking is for me is mental chatter, the
Mhm.
nonstop mental chatter, and and I have found since microdosing that my brain has gotten really quiet.
Mhm.
Like that's gone down to a minimum. When it does show up, it's just a whisper, where before it was just loud. And no matter what I was doing, if I was doing my creativity, it was saying I should be doing my chores, I should be doing laundry, I should be doing this. If I was out doing landscaping, it was like, oh, I should be inside being creative. Like no matter what I was doing the wrong thing. That to me was the nonstop thinking chatter, and that has pretty much is gone. Um, and also what Rhea was saying is that that awareness when I'm in a situation that I know, like a year or so ago, I would have come back with an answer like, oh yeah, well, and
Mhm.
now it's just like, and there's something legal in my life that's unfortunately having to move forward. They sent me a 16-page argument, exhibit A, exhibit B, blah blah blah, and I just kind of read it and I was kind of like, okay. And like Rhea said, I was like, I went back to the facts. Here's what the agreement that you wrote says. Here's what the conditions are. Here's what the thing is, and then I sent that back. It was like, I don't, sometimes it's faster than others, but it's like when you get in that space that, like, even though sometimes it feels personal and you think that they're trying to make it personal, it's like not personal.
Mhm.
And I don't have to jump in and make it personal back. Like, I don't have to, do I have opinions? Oh, I have tons of opinions. Like, that's the mental chatter. But it's like there's this new um, ability or presence to not have to make the comment that's triggered by whatever was coming from the other side. It's just like I might think it, but I'm just like not even interested in saying that, you know. And that to me has been the the gold in microdosing for me is
Mhm.
just the quietness of my brain, that mental chatter, which I think is to me is what you were describing with the thinking. It's just right, wrong, nonstop, good, bad, blah, blah, blah. Oh no,
Mhm.
you didn't. No. You know. And it's just like I don't have to respond.
Mhm. The freedom in not having to respond is a relief because we're recognizing that number one, even having a response didn't really serve us. All we were doing was saying, "Oh, you hurt me. I'm interpreting that as painful to me, so now I'm going to say something that hopefully hurts you back."
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of like Maria's example earlier. You're going to say that you're going to interrupt my day with this phone call to tell me all these terrible things about me or, whatever that call might have entailed. And our immediate typical self-responses place is, oh, I'm going to get defensive and now I'm going to hurt you 20 times worse.
Mm.
And obviously in the legal world that can happen as well too. Oh, you're going to sue me? I'll just sue you right back. And I'm just picking something, obviously not knowing your
Yep.
personal space, but that's our response instead of it being, what are the facts? What is this? Does it actually mean anything about me? That's the
Mm.
key. It only means something about you if you decide it means something about you. Sky put into the chat that breaking from that rigid way of thinking about right and wrong has been one of the biggest challenges in her thoughts. Everything is couched in this either or. And
Mm.
the thought process is very limiting. And rather than having gray space in the middle of, oh, maybe there's an option C, D, E, F, G, we sit in that black, white, right, wrong, either or way of thinking, and it is completely limiting.
Yep.
And when we look at the idea of emotional or mental, emotional or emotional keeps coming out of my mouth, mental wealth, there we go, removing the emotion from it. Mental wealth is cognitive flexibility. Having a richness or a fullness or an expansion of your mental capacity is not intelligence.
Hmm.
It's not an IQ rating. It's how do you allow for that cognitive flexibility for other ideas, other ways of perceiving a situation, moving out of this rigid thought process that we are trained in of recognition of responses, awareness of what others do, and then creating this interpretation of what that means about us. And that's exactly what both of you have described with the microdosing is when we quiet that down, then we have an opportunity to think differently. Think about having a conversation with a typical 5-year-old. They're they're like, here's 95 different ways to think about this, and what is their follow-up question every time? Well, why? Well, why? Well, what about, well, why can't we touch the stars? Why can't I just do this? Why can't I have a snack before dinner? Everything is why, because the world is their oyster. Opportunities are limitless. It's as we get older and we move away from that natural way of being and to that more modified state that's very fixed and rigid and defined and black and white and right and wrong, that we limit ourselves. And
Hmm.
that's a suffocating factor of the human experience, is the limitations we put on ourselves. And the fastest way to do that is by taking someone else's opinion into account and deciding that they must know something about us better than we do, or that they know something and maybe we should give it consideration.
Hmm. Wow.
Who else? What other thoughts or thinking tumbling around out there tonight?
I'll go. Yeah, I just definitely see what you're saying here when we're, talking about thought into thinking. And it's what's interesting to me is when we're talking about thinking, I think of like mechanisms that we've built ourselves in the name of protecting ourselves
Mhm.
in trying to find more, protection. We embrace judgment or how we perceive the world, like, okay, how we perceive based on our experience, based on what we've gone through or what we've seen before. So we attach meaning to like what we're seeing based on what we have already experienced and know. And it's how we figure we're protecting ourselves because we don't want to be risk. We don't want to be around something we don't know. But it's interesting how limiting that is and how the more we embrace it, the more we um, shrink ourselves down. And the more we kind of just let go and allow ourselves to say, hey, like every moment it could be just a new opportunity to see things differently and change and just always it's always changing. It's never what I thought it was. It's like yeah, it's just kind of whatever. And then I also wanted to say when you were talking about like right and wrong, it's either this or this. It's just binary. Made me think of Donnie Darko. Where he's talking about like they had that like line. It's just like any action is chopped up into the two basic human emotions, which is fear and love. And he's like, what about the spectrum in between? It's not just like one or the other.
Yeah.
So I just thought of Donnie Darko.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Brian, because if we think about that idea, I'm going to use fear and love are excellent, but for the sake of conversation, I'm going to use love and hate just because we tend to think of those as being polarizing.
Yeah.
But if we really consider that, you cannot have the definition of hate if you don't have the definition of love.
Hmm.
So they literally within our understanding cannot exist without each other. But we also limit how we define them by the fact that they have a definition. If you said to somebody, trying to think of a real natural way to say something, like I'm trying to think, like, what would a 5-year-old say? A 5-year-old would say, that was mean, but they don't, it's not until typically a little bit later, or maybe a 3-year-old would say that was mean, or they would just start crying. But then around 5 or 6, they might say, I hate you. They don't literally mean that they hate you, but that's that strongest negative word that they've been exposed to that's letting you know that whatever you just did is really antagonizing to them and isn't what they wanted. And then we do that as adults. If an adult says to another adult, I hate you, there's a lot behind that. Just like if an adult says to another adult, I love you, there's a lot behind that. Now, we all, I think, at this point can agree, though, that words have started to get thrown around pretty readily. Um, I'm going to use social media not as a demonic thing to pick on, because it can have its place of helpful, and it's just part of society. So to not accept it is fruitless at this point. But what happens is people have a buffer between them and the other person. It's words that are going out into this void of a name on the other side, not a transaction like the social transaction like we're having now, where we're seeing faces on a group screen. Something that is said to a face, you get to see the response to it. When you throw something out through a text message or a social media post or a social media response, or a response to a social media post, then you don't see the human on the other side. And humans tend to be much more inclined to be much less intentional with their words when they do that. And so we throw these things out there that the person writing it might just be in a state of angst, but the recipient on the other end, we don't know what their mental state is. We don't know how they are going to interpret what was just said to them. And that's really dangerous if we think about that. It's like putting a 12-year-old in a car. They don't understand the power of the vehicle. They don't know how to drive. They don't know how to control it. So you're like, here, off you go. And they're very inclined to hurt themselves and potentially other people because they don't know how to use it in a safe, healthy way. And words are the same way. If we just flippantly throw things out there, we don't know what kind of harm we can be contributing to because of how other people can interpret that. The flip side of that is, though, when other people say things to us and we internalize it and take that on as a message about us and defining our value, that's a us issue. So, having said all that, for people that are listening and maybe have not attended any of these groups before, what I'm not saying is say whatever you want and those other people need to figure it out. That's a them issue. It is up to you to be intentional with your words and with the things you choose to say, because we within culture understand that there is meaning behind things. But as individuals, when words are said to us or actions are done toward us, we get to decide how much power we allow that action or word to have in our lives. And it doesn't happen easily when we are in a modified way of thinking, because that is default. Brief little neuroscience interjection. That is literally within our default mode network of our brain. That is a real part of the brain. That default mode way of thinking is active when we're not focused on something else. You're either in default mode functioning, or executive mode functioning, or you're asleep. But if you're awake, you're in one of those. So executive mode functioning is I'm focused on something, I'm doing a project, I'm at work, I'm having a serious conversation. Default mode functioning is I'm daydreaming, maybe I'm in prayer, maybe I'm just driving my car and looking at, nature today. So the complicating factor that happens there is oftentimes our brains have become so overstimulated, we have started to use thought and thinking as a coping mechanism that we don't have a break between default mode functioning and executive mode functioning. And that's what I clinically call squirrel brain. I'm trying to be focused, but I've got all these little things happening out over here distracting me. That's squirrel brain. So microdosing, using microdoses of psilocybin specifically, has been shown on MRI imaging to quiet down that default mode network, that default way of thinking. All the definitions lie in that. All the interpretations lie in that. All of our past experiences, like Brian was talking about, and the meaning of those experiences, that's all held within that default mode network. So it is the filter that every thought passes through. And on the back end of the default mode network is the amygdala, which is where emotions arise from: fight or flight, fear, hypervigilance, other emotional responses. And on the front end of that is executive functioning. So what happens is we have this stimulation that the amygdala gets, tickled by an emotion. The interpretation of that emotion flies through that default mode network, straight to prefrontal cortex where we're like, boom, response. And that happens faster than we can describe it, right? Because typically what happens is we respond and then the cognitive part catches up and we're like, wait, why did I do that? Give me those words back. I wish I hadn't said that. And that is that self-protective response. So the default mode network is full of all these ideas that we hold on to about ourselves. And when something is inserted, we filter it through all of that and make meaning out of it. And if our filter is black and white, it doesn't take very long to filter. It either fits or it doesn't. It fits the black or it fits the white, and then we respond accordingly. When we quiet that down, we get some other opportunities for various colors in there. Maybe some shades of gray or even pink or blue or something. And the analogy with that is that we have an opportunity to have some cognitive flexibility and respond differently. We don't have to respond from default mode or self-protective way of thinking. Another cool thing about quieting down that default mode network is that's all that chatter, like Rick was talking about. That's the inner chatter. What about this? What about that? Does this mean this? Should I be afraid of that? What am I going to do 20 years from now? What's going to happen with the war? How high are gas prices going to go? All the things we could potentially be thinking about today in March of 2026 with the various things that are happening in the world. And there are people who get very, very wrapped up in all of those details. And some of you tonight on group, or some of you listening after the fact, might be those individuals that find yourselves getting really, really wound up in all those details, recognizing though cognitively you have no control over them. So, right, we get that rational side of our brain that's like, why do I keep thinking about this? I can't fix it. I don't have any control over this. But then we have the other part in the brain that's executive mode functioning. Then we have that default mode functioning that's like, yeah, but what if? What about? How will? Who's going to? What about me? That's all based in those fears and those ideas. So psilocybin quiets the default mode network. And to take that one step further, over time, that same MRI imaging shows that it resets. So just pause and exhale with me on that concept. Resetting, hitting the reset button and our default mode way of thinking. Because default mode can be exhausting. It's interesting that default mode is there to be meditative and introspective and kind of just that natural enjoyment of nature and state of being. But instead, it can become something very destructive to the self, to us, because of how we interpret the things that go round and round and round. So when we kind of go back to that question I posed at the beginning of, in what ways is your thinking contributing to angst or discomfort in your life? That's where it's held. And it is based on experiences. It's based on genetics. What were you handed when you popped out in your natural state of being? New definitions and interpretations since then. Belief systems, cultural, religious, political, that have been introduced during your time on this planet. So someone commented in the chat, it feels like in our world, we are constantly inundated with information. I've noticed when I'm taking in information, how easy it can be to get overwhelmed. And psilocybin has helped me to slow down the intake and the processing. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a great way to kind of add on to the things that those of you who have shared already were talking about. Another one in the chat. This is my first time here today, and today was my first experience with macrodosing. I'm currently trying to better understand how it's affecting me. Just to clarify, in the chat, it was typed macrodosing. Just to confirm if you're talking macro large dose experience or microdosing. Either way, with psilocybin, trying to better understand how it's affecting me, why I'm feeling the way I do, and exploring a new, more intentional approach to life, and look forward to learning. We're glad that you're here tonight. So that the key that I'll take in there is why I'm feeling the way I do. We go back to recognizing that emotions arise from the amygdala, and the amygdala is connected to that default way of thinking, that the way that we feel, we can put a lot of focus onto the way that we feel. But with microdosing and when we're using psilocybin, the question is, what do you notice? Take it past the feeling, past the physiological response to, does this have to mean something about me? Or what fear is this touching on that I'm connecting to this idea and this emotion? Okay, microdosing, thank you. So first experience with microdosing, starting to better understand how it's affecting her. Just two different experiences, so just wanted to confirm. But so I'll pause. That's a lot of me talking. Those of you that want to comment by video, I'm going to open it back up to you. Yeah, Rick, or actually Brian had just unmuted. Go ahead, Brian, and then Rick. Yeah.
I was gonna say that what I've experienced through my journey is, and especially when you're talking about thinking versus thought. I think mostly through microdosing, I've found it's a constant invitation to let go of control, because I constantly come back to when I'm thinking and I'm stuck in judgment, or I'm stuck in just like wanting to find meaning, or why things are happening, or why I feel this way, or what's happening. It's all those thoughts are coming deep down from a place of control and needing control. And and I say it's an invitation because I feel like it's not making me lose control, but it's inviting me to say, hey, so you don't have control over things that have happened, or how you even feel about it, or all this information that's being pumped into you, like it's in the chat, like all that information, you don't have control over that, what's going to happen and what's going to be affecting you. And it's okay. And you know what, at the end of the day, letting go of control is where you find that freedom, rather than being stuck and just like trying to control. So
Mhm.
that's what I found.
Absolutely. The word that came to mind as you were describing that, Brian, is the one I use in the 6-week microdosing guide, both the book and the video series, and that is relinquish control. Because when you relinquish something, you voluntarily choose to give it up. And that's to your point, rather than just saying, oh, I have no control, I'm a doormat, you're saying, I recognize that I legitimately don't control these things, and I'm choosing to let go of them in a way that then I can think more clearly and choose what my responses are.
Mhm. Yeah, it gives you the freedom. Giving,
Yeah,
like, letting go of the control actually gives you more control because it gives you more freedom.
absolutely. Absolutely. Rick.
I like that. It gives you more control because you can choose,
Yeah.
which I like. Um, this is my first time on this call, and I'm thankful for it. And um, like Charity, I work with Cindy at Liminal Lemonade, and she's helped me through microdosing and stuff. And the thing I love, because I I've never believed in the I'm this half of my brain or that half of my brain. I have the creative and the sciencey side. My sciencey side needs to be satisfied with information, like it has questions. And Cindy told me when we were talking about microdosing, she said it's sub-perceptual, so it's not like a macrodose journey that I'd done with her, because you're not going to see colors and stuff. It's like subperceptual. So the thing to do is, like you said, is to start noticing when you're responding differently in different situations, you know, and when I first started out, that sounds like a good description, but it's like, then you're like, well, am I responding different or am I not responding different? And,
Yes.
like trying to do it right. That's the
Yeah.
sciencey brain too.
Uh-huh.
Um, it did show up that it was like it wasn't like me making things up. It was like I clearly could tell that in this situation, if it had happened 2 weeks ago, I would have been completely different in it.
Yes.
Um, and that freedom that Brian talks about, it's that it's almost like for me, the microdosing gives you that little pause because, like you were saying, like our default is to you did that, I react, and then I think about it and wish I hadn't said that. It seems like it's given me a little bit extra pause before that comes out
Mhm. Yes.
to where I can stop it. You know, yeah, I had a thought, I have an opinion about what they said,
Mhm.
and oh, I could say it, but then I choose not to. And that goes back to what Brian said about it's like you actually have more control and more freedom because there's that pause that comes in for some reason. And that's my experience with microdosing, that sub-perceptual thing that happens gives me a little bit more of a pause between event and reaction.
Yeah, thanks for using that description too, Rick, because I think one of the things that I often offer to clients in talking about that is ask yourself, what's at the end of this? What is my goal in responding to said situation? And that works in all situations. What's my goal in responding to an intimate partner or a spouse or a boss or a colleague, a child, someone in the grocery store, someone else driving down the interstate? If someone else says or does something and I respond to it, what's at the end of that? When does it end? What's the goal? Because humans are very intelligent. And if in that intelligence, we often kind of, tie one hand behind our back to ourselves because we think, oh, I just need to keep going with this. Somehow I'm proving something, and we're not. So that question, what's at the end of that, can sometimes be helpful when we do get that pause. Sometimes there is a response that needs to be elicited.
Yeah.
But what is it? Because what's the goal? And then
Yeah.
sometimes responding is only going to keep fueling something that really is going to go nowhere, except exhaust both parties because, you're just kind of over it and emotionally exhausted at the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you said that. And what I find in that, because I'm like, so what's really going on here is how I say it.
Mhm.
So what's really going on here? And it's just like, and what I have found in that pause, I actually do, like more so now than before. I actually do like answer honestly, like, oh, this is totally to hurt them,
Mhm.
as opposed to where it was like, no, I'm right about this.
Mhm.
And they're being jerks and I need to tell them and I need to be a jerk about it. So they really know how much they messed up. That was like the old way.
Yep.
And now it's like it really is comes up as clear as like, oh yeah, this is all about fight. This is all about hurting somebody. It's not about actually resolving anything.
It's all
And-
self-protective.
yeah, and that clarity that comes is like um choosing not to sometimes choosing to respond, but choosing my words much more wisely,
Mhm.
hopefully. And or choosing not to respond. I've had some friends get not upset with me, but um I'm trying to think of the words. That's something else that happens too, is I think before my lips move now, um, instead of just throwing out words. Um, they get concerned's not the right word, but that's the only thing coming up right now because I'm not
Mhm.
like joining in the fight or joining in the what I call revving things up. And when somebody starts getting upset about things that are happening in the world, I usually say like, oh yeah, I get that's really upsetting, but I won't join in. And then at a certain point, I'll just say like, I get that you're upset, but I'm not gonna rev this up.
Mhm.
Like if we're gonna do something about it, let's talk about it. But I'm not gonna rev this up and have it ruin the rest of my day when there's nothing I can do about it
Mhm.
other than just I'm not gonna add fuel to the fire. You know,
Mhm.
it's just like I'll listen,
It
but I'm
doesn't,
not
yeah, it
I'm not
doesn't
gonna
serve you for getting what you actually want.
yeah,
That
yeah,
kind of goes back to now that there's no way to go back to being in a completely, what I'm going to call newborn baby state of natural existence because we know too much, right? We've lived on the planet. We know what it consists of. We know what humans are capable of. And, through discussions like this that we're having in group tonight, we come to have a deeper understanding of why humans interact with each other the way that they do. Because that's really the key. It's not just what can we do, but why do we do it? And when we start to really recognize the why behind it, then we respond to other people very differently, and we are able to be in a more natural state of thinking. Because there's no way to look at other people and question and analyze and say, okay, I know why they respond the way that they do. There's no way to do that without also doing that introspectively. Because our understanding comes from recognizing why we think the way that we do. And so Ray, to kind of touch on what you had mentioned in the chat, currently trying to better understand how the microdosing is affecting you and why you're feeling the way that you do and exploring a more intentional approach to life. I want to push a little bit on that definition of the microdosing, and rather than saying, and I love Cindy, so we've had this conversation, but rather than saying subperceptual, I like to use the definition subhallucinogenic. Microdosing is about being below that hallucinogenic threshold. You're not seeing the brighter colors, you're not having the walls moving, you're not, dealing with your parental issues when you're also trying to drive your car and go to work. Those are all macro experiences. But microdosing, you should perceive something. So if we use the term by definition of subperceptual, then we remove that below the threshold of perceiving a response or perceiving some effect from it. And I push on that a little bit because you absolutely should be perceiving something in order to know you're at your most helpful dose. Microdosing psilocybin is not a multivitamin. If you're taking a dose every day, like with your lion's mane and your reishi and your vitamin A and your vitamin C and your B12 and everything else that we've been told we don't get in our food, so we just take a supplement for these days, and you are not noticing that you are perceiving something differently about how you respond, your microdose is too low. So as you're getting started with microdosing, for those of you that are new to the microdosing side, continue to increase the dose until you perceive something. Don't let fear of how many little scoops am I using or how much mushroom am I using, do not define what your brain needs by what you think is a lot or a little. Again, remove the definitions. Continue to slowly add to your microdose until you have a day where I call it kind of that aha. Oh, that's what I was wanting. That's what I was noticing. That's different than what I would have thought or responded to, or how I would have shown up 6 months ago or a week ago. It shouldn't take you 6 months, but a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And then as we continue to go forward, it's interesting because people will say, oh, I feel like I need more now. I'm not noticing the same things. That's called growth. That's called healing. It doesn't mean you need more mushroom. It means that your baseline has reset now. Your baseline way of experiencing and thinking and going through thought and defining those meanings has shifted. It's like math. You don't need to keep studying your multiplication tables when you already know them. You don't think, what is 5 times 5? You see it and you're like 25 and then off you go. So same thing with microdosing. When we change the way that we think, that is permanently structurally changing the brain. That is the reset of that default mode network and thinking about yourself and thinking about your responses differently. At some point in time, you're going to look back a year later and be like, wow. And I can tell you from experience because I do this. Like, wow, that chick was judgmental. I didn't think I was. That's how I was raised. That was my default way of being. I thought I was a pretty nice person. I think there were aspects that were nice, but I was very judgmental because my world was very black and white. It was very rigid. And that was my filter. So now when I recently had dinner with a couple of friends from high school who knew me back in the judgmental days. And we were kind of just laughing about the fact, because they're, of course, microdosing too. So I'm like, hey, girls, here, guess what I found out about? So must share. But all of us were just kind of chuckling about how we used to respond, and that none of us would have hung out with ourselves back then, knowing what we know now. Right. But that's part of the process of learning. And so again, even as we continue to learn and we continue to grow and these things come to light, there are times during the microdosing journey that you will likely become very irritated and it will be very uncomfortable. Because if you're honest and you look in the mirror and you really look at those thoughts that you have and why you have them and how they permeate every single decision that you make, goodness, it's annoying.
I was gonna say it's annoying.
Yeah. Like, man, I spent a lot of energy getting real wound up about that, and it doesn't matter. Yes, Rio.
Just real quick, I wanted to say thank you for clarifying that sub-hallucinogenic. That I know that's what she meant, but
Yes.
I'm glad you clarified that. That makes much more sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
Those
thank you.
definitions are important. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm not good with Zoom and all the buttons. I just wanted to share that that is what I have experienced just over the last 2 months. But I went down. I actually cut back on my dose because I I was making decisions. I actually kind of went into like a black and white clear space for a couple of weeks. And it was fabulous. And my business partner and I were talking about that we were making decisions and we were getting things done. And we powerhoused for a little bit. And I am a very emotional, right-sided, also I could just categorize myself. I'm Italian. Like this is just, I respond, I react, and that is part of who I am. And that's what you do. And so I actually questioned if I was like too chill. Like this has just got me a little bit too flat because it was a little bit uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
Because I wasn't, criticizing myself for every decision. I fired my biller for the company and I just said, you're not doing your job. You're fired. And I did it in one day, right? And I slept well. And so I actually backtracked just about maybe it was 2 weeks ago. I said, I'm going to cut this a little bit to make sure that I'm not like, I felt a little desensitized.
Mhm.
And so for 4 days, I spun. I cried a couple of days. I couldn't sleep. And I'm not going to say it was anything massive, but it was enough for me to go, oh, that that was how I was operating, constantly. That's my default,
Mhm.
being emotional and um, being so expressive with everything and not getting my point across, or, sometimes being too emotional about things. And I can acknowledge that. And so it was about 4 days. I felt all the old effects and I said, okay, I'm good. And I take 100. I don't know if it's okay to share that, but
Yeah,
I
of
I've
course.
good 100. And I had accidentally done 125 one day, and it was a little too much. I felt myself like a little giggly, like a little too, I could tell. I was like, okay, I just knew that was too much. But I'm glad that I went backwards just to double check, and I really struggled for about 4 days. And so now here we are. I'm on this back on this track second week. And, I had today's situation that I really did feel like I handled it beautifully. And Rick, I relate. I was on a legal phone call for quite a while yesterday. And um, I did the same thing. I hung up and I was like so proud of myself for being so concise with what the facts were, and especially with something legal, you know, emotions do not help a lot of situations. And so I've recognized that 100 is beautiful. And what I'm learning is I'm not desensitized. I'm not flat, you know, that for me, being a little bit more balanced and at ease is part of the uncomfortability because I can be, you know, more most of the time. And that's how I was raised also, right? So that's what I'm learning and being okay with because it feels a little bland sometimes that I'm just making a decision and moving on. You know, I'm like, oh, I didn't cry or there was, nothing massive that happened. And it's so that's been interesting to be okay with a little bit more of a baseline that is easygoing.
Yes. No, that's great because that goes back to how you defined yourself. And you had
Okay.
to really be okay with questioning how you defined yourself to be able to say, is that definition serving me though? Am I showing up and really getting what I want out of my life and responding in a way that's authentic to me? Or am I saying, if I'm not feeling these emotions and allowing that to take over, I'm not me? You know, who gave us that definition to start with? We did. I mean, it starts in the home of origin to some degree.
Wait, wait.
Yeah, I say it starts there. It starts in that home of origin, in that environment and culture, but we choose if we're going to take it, if we're going to maintain it.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to have that cognitive flexibility.
And on that note, what are you noticing about with trauma? Because um this could like I mean this heals, right? This changes everything. So are you still addressing, I mean, I know you're not ignoring it, but like how are we still addressing trauma if people are actually feeling different towards things? I mean, you're gonna get me out of a job. I'm all my referrals are gonna talk me out of a job. I mean, I practice trauma therapy every day, and I agree that if people do not feel triggered and they do not need to fully process trauma, I mean, which is beautiful, it's healing, but I will be out of work.
I think there's enough to go around,
I
but
know, I know.
but
But
at the same time,
right.
when we look at healing trauma, so if we use a definition term that's used in society, if I say PTSD, everybody that's listening to this call, definitely within the United States and probably internationally, put some sort of connotation to that, some understanding of, okay, something traumatic has happened and is continuing to impact the person to current day, and it is negatively or impacting their life in an unhealthy or negative way. So we'll use that definition for PTSD/trauma. The trigger is always emotional.
Right.
It can be something outside. Let's say we'll use military. That's easy. Let's say a car backfires and a military individual, veteran with PTSD, hits the ground immediately. Okay, so that is the body's physiological response to the interpretation of something that is emotional.
Mhm.
The first thing was really, what is this? Was it a car backfiring or was it a gunshot? The response is autonomic self-protection,
Mhm.
rooted in fear. We don't need to self-protect if we don't think something's going to happen to us. The fear of self-preservation is what drives all of these emotional responses. We just often don't peel back the layers enough to really recognize that that's what's happening. We talked, even in discussion tonight, we've talked about self-protective and coping mechanisms and defining of the self. It's all rooted in fear.
Mhm.
Fear of not surviving, fear of invalidation, fear of being overlooked, not appreciated, not significant enough to have a relationship with, whatever those fears are, that's the root. When we can separate the emotion from the memory of the experience, that's where healing is. I often say we don't do frontal lobotomies anymore, not commonly anyway. So you're not going to forget, but forgetting is not the goal.
Right.
For experience is education, it's information. having an emotion connected to it, that's the complicating factor.
Mm-hmm.
That's what sends us in traumatic, quote unquote, traumatic response patterns. So separating the emotion from the memory of the experience is where the healing is.
Right.
With microdosing, we are structurally and functionally changing the brain.
Mm-hmm.
With doing that, we have a chance to choose to respond differently and to choose to separate the meaning from that emotion that's there. Now the emotion is literally just a feeling. It's not a feeling connected to a memory that has meaning about who I am as an individual. It's no longer, I smelled a certain smell and that made me think about the time that somebody hurt me, and now I'm feeling like I need to isolate and self-protect.
Mm-hmm.
You just smell the smell
Right.
without having the long lineage attached to it. So that's where psilocybin is healing. And also neuroplasticity. By enhancing neuroplasticity, those are brand new neural connections. Again, new ways of thinking, flexibility within interpretation and within meaning. Strengthening the connections that are there. Memory is not real dependable.
Right. Right.
We have a lot that we hold on to within memory that someone else may have been in the exact same situation at the same moment with us, and they're going to have some different memories of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in a situation that's happening, things are being filtered through that same default mode network. So, all you have to do is ask a couple who's fighting, what are they fighting about? And you're still going to get two kind of different answers of what the problem is. So, but
That's why I have a legal case. So are you then still utilizing trauma therapy and EMDR with people that are microdosing?
you
Or
asked, yeah. Mhm.
would that then, I mean, be like, I don't want to say re-traumatizing, but bringing back up something that they're not connecting to? And that's what I meant in a lighthearted way of like, I'm talking myself out of a job because if I am we want people to heal and they're not feeling anything, they're not going to feel triggered, which is the goal.
Right.
But then we're not using those modules.
And so from a clinical standpoint, here is my question to people when they say, I want to know, sexual assault is an easy one, right? So I want to know who sexually assaulted me when I was a child and why. My question is, why do you want to know that? I want to know who it was that hurt me. Why do you want to know that? What is that information going to get you? Going back to what Rick was talking about, what's at the end of that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the goal? Well, I just feel like I should know and then I can understand it. How are you going to understand something so blatantly hurtful? There's not an understanding to it.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot understand mental illness if you are not mentally ill. It doesn't make rational sense. And I'm using that in really a clinical standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to understand things that don't make sense within the ethical and moral environment that we have created.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not understanding. It's a desperate seek for information because there's something connected to it that's connected to how we identify ourselves. That is where the trauma is rooted, is where we are now. And again, it could be any variety of traumatic experiences, but to define something as trauma means it was so unsettling and disruptive that I'm using that as a key identifying part of who I am in my experience on this planet.
Right.
The goal again is not to forget it.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not to hold on to it, But if we say the goal is I want to have no memory of it, well, we can try hypnosis, we can try frontal lobotomies, we can try, some electro stimulation. That's not the goal.
Mhm.
The goal is you don't want to feel the pain anymore.
Mhm.
Why is the pain there? What is your thinking, to go back to kind of how we started the conversation? What is that meaning, definition, interpretation? What power are you giving to that you're holding on to so tightly that you as the individual are not allowing yourself to let go of it? And this is not in any way minimizing the challenges of those emotional connections and traumatic experiences. But microdosing, you can use it with EMDR, you can use it with trauma therapy because it's doing something completely different.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
And here's what I'm going to say as a clinician, as a licensed therapist on this call. If someone said to me, I can either go to therapy or I can microdose, which one should I do? I will say microdose. Not because therapy doesn't have its place, but because if you have to pick one, you have to structurally change the brain.
Right.
And that's what pharmaceuticals have been trying to do, but they don't do that. And you can't get that structural shift without all of the side effects either.
Right.
Um,
Mm.
so on that, I am in trauma therapy and it's not really working for me. So I was like referred to microdosing because it's like, how do I heal from this? Because every action that I'm taking towards my spouse or other people, it reacts into anger because some of those traumas are like triggering, and I don't know how else to look at it differently. Um, I'm not trying to get personal, but like when I was 5 years old, my parents passed away. So I was like sexually molested from family members. And it's just hard. It's really hard to actually heal from this. And now I have a little one and I don't want to like put my trauma on her.
Mhm.
So I don't know. So I'm taking this route to microdosing and see how it works for me.
I can't see, so I just want to make sure you were pausing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really vulnerable. And that's exactly what these groups are for, is to have these hard conversations and to
Mhm.
have a safe place to be able to share some of these things and talk through them. What I am recommending for you with the microdosing is to really find that dose where you are noticing that your responses are different, because your brain is holding on to all of that in order to protect itself.
Mhm.
That's what the memories are for.
Mm.
The memories are supposed to be there to say, hey, don't be in this situation. Don't go down this road. Don't, you know, drive a car like that. Don't drink this much. Don't do those things, whatever they are that lead to the various traumatic outcomes that we have. That's what memory is for, is to protect us. The stove is hot.
Mhm.
But so often when we attach that meaning from those personal experiences to how we perceive ourselves, why did somebody think it was okay to hurt me? Why did somebody think it was okay to hurt a child at the age of 5? For what? There was nothing, there was no thought about you in that. But you are not them. You have your own child now, and you look at that child and you honor them and you treasure them and you protect them. And part of that piece of you that protects them and honors them is because you know what the rest of the world is capable of,
Mhm.
and you don't want them to experience that. But you also don't want your fear of what you know the world is capable of to be the overarching way that they view the world. And you'll find that balance. And that's why I say therapy is helpful. The reason therapy is helpful is because you get to talk through the things that you are noticing and that are coming up. And that's why we host these groups and why we have so many groups that we offer through our practice to go along with the microdosing. Because as we quiet down this inner chatter and we start to recognize some of these things that are there, and like I said earlier, it can be really uncomfortable and even create those feelings of angst and anger and frustration. How could somebody do that? Why do I let this happen? Why am I responding this way? It's not about just letting those things be there. It's recognizing them and then moving through them. If we look at the things that we've experienced and the definitions we have as problems, we put them in a box. If we look at these things as challenges, we see a way through. It's a movement towards a different way of thinking, a different way of living, a different way of perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
So for you with the trauma therapy right now, the frustration is that your brain chemically has not been on board with all the cool stuff that your therapist is trying to do with you. Your therapist has been trained in old information. Nothing wrong with the therapist. That's what we all have. What is the educational system? It's old information. And I promise I'm not going down a conspiracy theory path. I'm just saying that's what we have, and it doesn't work. Otherwise, we'd have no trauma. We'd have no mental illness. We'd have no domestic violence or addiction or anything else that we look at as traumatic. But it doesn't work in and of itself because it is not structurally changing the brain. All the information is still going through the same pathways. So with microdosing, find the dose where you are noticing a shift in how you respond, a shift in how you respond to a memory. I used to not be able to take a certain exit off I-25 up in Denver because there was so much emotion and angst and past connected to that. I could not drive down that road. I would just take the long way, which is really long in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
But now I can go and not have even the same memories that I used to have.
Mm-hmm.
Because without that emotion being there, my brain's not running through 957 details of old crap. I can drive down that road now and be like, that was freaking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad that that is not my life anymore. But it is so separate from me. It almost feels like a movie that I watched about someone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, I have a lot of life experience and information. So again, the brain has retained what's helpful, but it's let go of the part that was really hindering and holding me back from growth.
Mm-hmm.
So please continue to stay involved in group as much as you can. And with your own therapist, as you're starting to see things differently, if you have questions specific to your dosing, reach out to us. We want to help each person. That's why we have a team that has been put together to really help each individual who wants to microdose find what's most helpful to them. If you're going through the information on the website and like I see somewhat limited options, yes, the website is going to have limited options because we just want to have options out there. But you as an individual have access to whatever you need at an individual level if you get in touch with us personally once you've gotten started with something and you're finding how it's helpful to you or what you need or what questions you have. So I hope that was helpful for you, Ray. Anything that you want to add on to that or any other questions you have this evening in our discussion?
Sorry. I guess more of like, because I'm taking the lowest dose because I'm getting familiar with it. And how much can you take?
Well, you can take between 1 scoop and 999 scoops. No, you don't need to take that much. But what I will say is you need to continue increasing that dose are you using the powder?
Yes.
Okay, so just continue increasing that dose by one additional little tiny scoop, which is 0.05 of a gram or 50 milligrams each day. So if you use 1 scoop today, you went about your day, didn't notice anything, tomorrow use 2 scoops. Go about your day, see what you notice. If you're like, still don't notice anything, again, we're staying below that hallucinogenic threshold, so subhallucinogenic, but you need to perceive something. So then day 3, you would take 3 scoops, see what you notice. Try and reflect at the end of the day. The challenge is when we're starting something new, the brain wants to be in that mindset of, do I notice something? Do I notice something? Is it helping? Is it helping? Is it helping? Try to just set that aside and tell yourself, hey, at the end of the day, I'm going to reflect on the day. I'm going to look at my dose and reflect card. I'm going to jump in that 6-week microdosing with purpose video series or the book if you have that. Whatever tools that you're using from our practice, Or if you have, well, you always get something, but depending on the ones that you have, but also just for yourself, maybe just have a notebook where you write some things down. What did I notice today? Sometimes it's big epiphanies like what Rhea described and what Rick has described, and you just have these moments where you recognize in the moment that you're responding differently. But that tends to come a little bit more with over the next week or two. But we have clients that microdose a gram a day,
Mm.
some 2 grams a day. But listen, they are driving a car, they're going to work, they're taking care of their friends, family, pets, responsibilities. I would be on the couch
Yeah.
talking to God. That's my microdose is very, very small. But that's why I say it's individualized. It's what does your brain need? On average, people will kind of land in the about 0.1 of a gram or 100 milligrams to 0.3 to 0.4 of a gram, 300 to 400 milligrams, which would end up being 6 to 8 of those little scoops like you have. So don't get caught up on the number of scoops. More mushroom is not better or worse. It's just what does your brain need? Give yourself permission to be curious and to find the dose that's really helpful to you. And then get in touch with our office. Let us know what that dose is. We'll make sure you can get what you need on a monthly basis for you within your microdosing subscription agreement.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. This conversation tonight has been super encouraging and really enjoyable. I appreciate all of you offering so much of yourselves and your story and your experiences and really collectively digging into that idea of thinking and what those definitions and those concepts do when we set them really rigid. How do we allow for some of that cognitive flexibility? So we are almost 15 minutes past the hour, which is totally fine. I'm here for all of it. But does anyone have any other kind of final thoughts or questions for tonight before we sign off?
I just wanted to say, yeah, quickly at the end, I love the theme, and I've found through the journey, I've continued to let go of identity and trauma. I feel like we need to adhere to identity and trauma, and what I've found is we can let go of that and understand that it's not our identity. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate what you do.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for being here. It'd be real boring to talk to myself, even though I do it now and then. All right, well, with that, I'm going to stop the recording for this evening. Thank you for those of you listening online. If you want to jump into any of our live discussions, you can go to growyourownthoughts.org. The calendar is on the homepage with dates, times, and Zoom links. We'd love to have you.